Chapter 206, Transformation. Once things were settled, the hotly fired up young folk with money started to move very rapidly. Florida's injuries were quite severe, and news from the Cairo mercenary band indicated that he was still in a coma. Edwin's every move and gesture was under close surveillance. After entering the valley, he stayed within the hotel, seeming to want to take care of the wound in his back first. Trunks left the Valley of Sunshine after he'd had settled matters with Han Sha-oh, saying that he wanted to discuss future plans and the good news of Florida's injuries with his brothers. Phoebe moved about the Valley of Sunshine the next couple of days after receiving Han Sha-oh's enormous wealth. She called upon her connections to talk to several merchants and also helped Han Sha-oh collect materials to refine the wood and water elite zombies. Emily stayed within Dark Mantle and seemed to be communicating with the executives. The senior levels of the Dark Mantle seemed to want a large operation this time to take down Bob Asher. As someone in the know, Trunks was the one busying about forming a mercenary band. There wasn't much for Han Sha-oh to do after the issue of funding had been taken care of. He used the 2 days of downtime to return to the Cemetery of Death. Han Sha-oh wasn't actually too worried about Edwin's threats. After all, he had a dark dragon in the Cemetery of Death as backup. Through some communication, Han Sha-oh understood that if Gilbert wanted to recover quickly, he'd need to absorb some creature cores. It was because he understood this and that he did indeed need Gilbert's strength that he'd brought Gilbert along with him over the past 2 days into the dark forest to hunt down some high-level magical creatures. The two killed 7 windblade wolves, 4 frost eagles and 1 medusa in 2 short days. With Han Sha-oh's current strength and Gilbert's help, the high-level creature medusa was defeated after the two joined forces. Gilbert mostly recovered from his injuries after absorbing these creature cores as well as the medusa's valuable blood, and his strength was no longer affected by his injuries. Gilbert had absorbed all the cores but had left behind the teeth, skin and flesh. Han Sha-oh took all those and threw them into one of the warehouses in the Cemetery of Death. On the eve of the second night, Gilbert stayed within the Cemetery of Death to digest the cores. As for Han Sha-oh, he left to visit the broad and swift-moving waterfall near the cemetery. The waterfall dived down like the universe emptying itself, bringing with it a ferocious strength that swept away all obstacles in its path. It seemed to be falling directly from the heavens. Han Sha-oh sat down cross-legged underneath the falls, positioning himself close to an enormous boulder near the center and enduring the crushing force of the waterfall. The parts of his body exposed to the waterfall had all turned a bright red. Han Sha-oh had seemed to become part of the boulder as he sat there without moving an inch. He seemed to be a lifeless sculpture. However, the magical yuan was circulating with the speed of 10,000 horses galloping ahead. All muscles, tendons and bones in which the magical yuan circulated past were refined over and over again. The demon infant started bouncing slightly in his abdomen as a small figure exactly the same as Han Sha-oh emanated vigorous life force. Han Sha-oh had continuously achieved new heights during this time. He'd finally completely absorbed all of Johnny's soul. Bits of information floated randomly through Han Sha-oh's mind. All sorts of disordered memories were in the mix as well, appearing as clouds of mist that no one could see clearly. Han Sha-oh understood that these scattered bits of information were the memories that Chu Kanglan had left in his mind. Han Sha-oh had been only able to obtain small parts of this information before reaching the true demon realm and having his brain fully developed. The majority of the information had been locked in his mind. Now that he had reached the true demon realm and his mind developed, Han Sha-oh had seen great increases in his memory comprehension and thinking abilities. Those previously hazy, indistinct and scattered memories were swiftly casting off their veil and becoming clearer beneath Han Sha-oh's full examination. All sorts of bizarre secret magical arts, parts of profound incantations, refinement methods to create magical treasure, demon generals and formations were running through Han Sha-oh's mind at high speed. They were becoming part of Han Sha-oh's memories that would never be destroyed. He suddenly awoke after who knew how long. There was hard to conceal excitement, pride and confidence in that pair of eyes beneath the rush of the waterfall. It was as if he'd been reborn, as he was filled with the heretofore unseen confidence. The solid realm, open passages realm, molded spirit realm, true demon realm, bloodlust realm, separate demon realm, carnal realm, 9 Changes Realm and Omen Realm were the 9 levels of cultivation that would enable a mortal to ascend to a level of existence that was as omnipresent as the gods. A frightening strength that could cleave open the heavens and earth would grow to being able to move mountains and motions, as well as grant the holder immortality in the end. Drew a magnificent and mysterious blueprint in front of Han Sha-O. The blueprint had been unfurled now, and Han Sha-O was the brush able to trace his unbounded future according to his desires. This power that could reforge, fly through the heavens and earth, be indestructible, and surpass the wheel of rebirth truly did exist. A thought struck him as all the pores of his body expelled gouts of dark gray murky air out of his body. This murky air had been the dredges from Johnny's soul and had remained in Han Sha-O body after the demon infant had absorbed the strength from the former's soul. Han Sha-O's body wavered as he took off, shooting across the sky. He landed solidly atop an enormous tree, put on a warrior's dark green outfit, and flew towards the cemetery of death. Master, you seem a bit different from normal. Gilbert looked askance at Han Sha-O as soon as the latter had returned to the cemetery of death and couldn't help but speak out. Oh, what's different about me? Han Sha-O looked at Gilbert and smiled faintly. Shaking his head, Gilbert said, I can't express it. Your eyes seem a bit more mysterious, and your aura as well. You seem more confident, the confidence of having grasped the situation and being assured of victory. Han Sha-O understood. After obtaining all of Chu Kanglan's memories, he now knew many magical arts like the back of his hand. He'd be able to take on Edwin even without Gilbert's help now. But because he lacked sufficient strength, it'd be a bit troublesome for him to do so. Since your injuries have healed, leave with me. Wonderful. Are you taking me to do some sneaky and underhanded things again this time? Shut up, do what I tell you. Master, I seem to have seen that patch of dirt shift slightly after you left today. Gilbert first pouted and then suddenly remembered something as he pointed at the area where the Earth Elite Zombie was being refined. Han Sha-O started and turned back to look at the place of extreme Earth. He suddenly discovered that the center had indeed sunk in. The earth chi that had been circulating the area had all vanished without a trace. Overjoyed, Han Sha-O laughed heartily. Very good, it looks like he's thoroughly absorbed all of the earth chi. He'll be able to emerge from the dirt after a few more days. Humphrey, just a zombie, what's so good about it? Gilbert flicked a dismissive glance over and grumbled. Just as Gilbert finished speaking, the place he was standing on suddenly collapsed as an enormous crack appeared out of nowhere after a series of earth-shattering rumbles. It caught Gilbert unawares and closed on him. The crack seemed to be alive as it kept closing, squeezing Gilbert's body and making him curse loudly. All right, let him go. Han Sha-O could feel the Earth Elite Zombie's dissatisfaction from deep within the ground and knew that he must be behind all this. The originally retracting crack suddenly sprang open like a spring. When the immobile Gilbert discovered that the earthquakes and shifting of the ground was due to the Earth Elite Zombie below the ground, he couldn't help but wear an expression of extreme shock on his face. He hastily climbed out when the crack loosened. He was formed here and has been absorbing the earth chi here. This place is his territory. He's able to deploy strength several times his own as long as he's here. He can move the earth and mountains, crack the ground, form the earth into a cage to trap you, or coalesce an earth dragon to attack you. This is all incredibly easy for him. Remember, don't fight him in his territory. He's basically invincible deep in the ground. He may not be able to manipulate everything according to his will when he leaves, but any bit of land here can be transformed into his weapon. Han Sha-O looked at the scrambling Gilbert with a supercilious smile as he explained faintly. The elite zombies would be able to greatly increase their strength in the area that they were formed. Whoever irritated them in their own territory was committing a foolish action. Gilbert had offended him with a word, and the Earth Elite Zombie had immediately struck back tit for tat, allowing Han Sha-O to understand that the Earth Elite Zombie wasn't a low-level zombie that could only listen to his commands. It looked like it was the same as the little skeleton, having gained his own sentience. When he saw that Gilbert was behaving himself after clambering out of the crack, Han Sha-O spoke in the Earth Elite Zombie's general direction. Refine the earth chi well and emerge sooner rather than later. A beam of thought was sent into Han Sha-O's mind. The Earth Elite Zombie had obviously heard his words and sent over understood. Come, let's leave. Han Sha-O walked towards the center of the cemetery of death. As he looked as Gilbert. When he passed by the Yin demon cave, he noticed that there were only 5 wraiths left. It seemed like the 3 Yin demons would be formed soon as well. Just what's with that zombie? Why is he so strong? Gilbert couldn't hold back the questions in his heart when they left the Earth Elite zombie and arrived at the transportation matrix. You wouldn't understand even if I explained to you. He's just different from any other zombie warrior you know. His existence began to change the moment he started absorbing the Earth Chi. Remember, you should try to avoid provoking him in the cemetery of death. He's much stronger than you can imagine in here. Han Sha-Oh smiled faintly and instructed Gilbert. Han Sha-Oh pushed Gilbert into the middle of the transportation matrix as he spoke and then activated it, returning to the Dark Mandal's stronghold in the Valley of Sunshine. Han Sha-Oh put the 6 magical sticks away when he walked out of the secret room and lifted a piece of wooden floor above him. A hallway leading upstairs appeared and the two walked up. "Brian, you're back," Emily suddenly called out when she saw them emerge. "Hi beautiful woman, we meet again." Gilbert smiled at Emily in greeting when he walked up and was greeted with an enormous eye roll from Emily. "What's wrong?" After receiving all of Chu Yanglan's memories, Han Sha-Oh was now full of confidence about the future. He believed that if he worked hard enough and advanced his magical cultivation, he'd be able to obtain strength that would make everyone respect him. It was because of this that he hadn't terribly minded some of the difficulties and setbacks that he was encountering, and asked Emily rather carelessly. "The Cairo mercenary band just sent word that Florida has awoken and that he called for a meeting as soon as he woke up. He plans on moving against us with no thought of anything whatsoever and wants us to be on our guard." In addition, Edwin and Belinda seems to have made a trip to the Cairo mercenary band these days. This is information we gained ourselves. No one from the Cairo mercenary band told us about this. Emily responded quickly, nodding his head and understanding Han Sha-Oh thought with a furrowed brow and then smiled slightly. "We'll deal with things as they come up. If Florida Dare comes to his death, then I'll make sure he doesn't get off easily. Don't worry about Edwin for now. I think Lorden won't be so silly as to create trouble for us now. We're something he can leverage now. He'll wait until Florida is dead before creating trouble for us." In my estimations, Edwin went to meet with the Cairo mercenary band possibly to obtain some information about Florida, but Lorden may not have necessarily agreed to help him against us. He also won't choose to cooperate with Edwin against us. Don't be too bothered by it. What we need to do now is to defend our current stronghold. Emily was stunned momentarily by Han Sha-Oh's words and then looked at him oddly. This was when she discovered that Han Sha-Oh had worn a remote expression on his face all along, as if no danger would shake his confidence. His eyes were even more profound and mysterious, and his entire demeanor had changed. He was full of an unexplainable feeling, making Emily feel a bit surprised. Why are you looking at me so oddly?" Han Sha-Oh rubbed his nose and laughed when he saw Emily stare at him unblinkingly with her beautiful eyes. "Brian, has something happened to you these past 2 days? Why do I feel like you're different from before?" Emily didn't conceal the thoughts on her mind and asked directly. "Indeed, Master is a bit different from usual. I've discovered it as well." Gilbert also couldn't help but murmur loudly at this point. His eyes kept looking over Han Sha-Oh, trying to figure out what was different about him from usual. Hey, nothing much, just that I've received a large amount of memories over these past couple of days. They've helped me understand a lot of things." Han Sha-Oh wore a mysterious expression on his face as he explained to Emily. Emily still felt Han Sha-Oh was mysterious beyond belief, and that the things that happened to him were marvelous and illogical. He had a little skeleton that wasn't afraid of dark magic, could fly without making use of magic and fighting aura, and had an amazing weapon that moved according to his thoughts. These were all out of Emily's range of comprehension. "Forget it, I wouldn't understand if you explained either. I just need to know that you're alright." Emily shook her head and gave up further questioning. She suddenly remembered what Han Sha-Oh had said last and asked, "How right, you said you wanted to defend our current location. How are you going to?" Han Sha-Oh paused silently with a mysterious expression, then voiced a word that Emily was completely unfamiliar with. Formation. Chapter 207, 100 ghosts in a frenzied dance. The ability to set up a formation that could seize the wonders of the heaven and earth using the mystical rules of nature and a few special ingredients was a secret skill that all magical cultivators could grasp. Han Sha-O was no longer content staying passive after digesting all of Chu Kanglan's memories. Even if his current cultivation level wasn't up to par, he'd be able to take a more active role by using some magical formations. Using a strategy of acting first and reporting later, Han Sha-O took over the shop with the place of extreme water. He used Florida as an excuse to fob off Harris when he came by later. The Cairo mercenary band was in charge of everything in the Valley of Sunshine, so they weren't afraid of Han Sha-O getting up to any tricks. The shop would unconditionally be returned over to Han Sha-O anyways once Florida was dead. Han Sha-O was just taking possession of his property earlier. A storefront wasn't the same as other items capable of being taken away and easily stored. If that had been the case, Harris probably wouldn't have been willing to hand over the store that early, since he would have been concerned that Han Sha-O would have taken the items away. But since the store was immobile, this concern didn't exist for Harris. Not to mention the deed was still in his hands. Thus, Harris didn't say anything after listening to Han Sha-O's explanations, tacitly approving of what Han Sha-O had done. The storefront, rumored to be cursed, was larger than Han Sha-O had imagined. It was roughly 400 square meters and had an 80 square meters courtyard. There were many small and large rooms, including various tables, chairs, beds, lamps, and assorted furniture. It was because this was an illumined place that all of the items inside had become unlucky after the owner had died. No one would take anything from this store and potentially bring trouble down on their heads. Apart from lacking blankets and other daily necessities, as well as a thick layer of dust due to lack of occupants for a long time, there wasn't much that the storefront was missing. Han Sha-O had already explained the peculiarities of this storefront earlier when talking about forming the mercenary band. Although Emily and Phoebe didn't quite understand his explanation, they understood that Han Sha-O had already cleaned out the unclean thing within the store. Out of their trust for Han Sha-O, although the two girls were a bit uncomfortable with this place, they didn't protest and allowed Han Sha-O to take up residence within. Since he'd decided to set up a formation, he had to make the necessary preparations. Han Sha-O made a list and put Emily and Phoebe in charge of collecting some necessary items of coal to form the foundational materials. Due to consideration of their safety, Han Sha-O had Gilbert follow behind them. With such a strong and extraordinary dark dragon following behind, and the two girls being an archmage and a sword master respectively, they likely wouldn't come off worse for the wear if they ran into Edwin. Once everyone had been sent on their way, Han Sha-O chanted a necromancy magic spell and summoned 10 skeletal warriors. He gave an order and they all picked up brooms and dustbins and started sweeping from room to room. The Sure Soul formation was a formation that trapped victims in a realm of illusions. This formation needed the death ores from 100 ghosts to support it, as well as the bones from lands of cold to form 6 sure pillars and the blood of virgins as ink. Once magical glyphs were written onto the pillars, a piece of floating rock infused with 5 drops of blood essence from the caster would form the eye of the formation and complete it. Once the formation was formed, any enemies who didn't understand formations would be attacked by the death auras of 100 ghosts as soon as they walked in. They would become disoriented and see illusions, discovering a spectral clone of themselves that wanted to kill them at all costs. Fear would cause him to sink into madness in an instant. Furthermore, no matter how strong their heart was, it was a very difficult thing to triumph over one's heart. The well in the middle of the place of extreme water had been slightly modified by Han Sha-O so that he could make full use of it. He was using the well as the eye of the formation and had added some of the materials he'd picked up these days to form a small-scale kelpie possession formation. Each wraith had been planted with a jellyfish and had been transformed into a kelpie in the well through use of secret arts. Anyone who neared it would be possessed by the kelpies and dragged into the well. After setting up the two formations, Han Sha-O suddenly reflected that he'd been wise alright to combine the use of Chu Kanglan's magical cultivation and the necromancy magic of this world. It seemed that they did indeed give rise to unforeseen effects when combined. The Sure Soul formation ghosts could be replaced by wraiths, and the bones of cold could be replaced by ordinary skeletal warriors. The Kelpie possession formation also made use of wraiths. If Han Sha-O hadn't known necromancy magic, he'd have to collect all the materials himself from cemeteries. However, With the identity of a necromancer, he merely needed a few chance to collect all the materials. It had saved him no end of effort. After busying about for a day, Emily, Phoebe and Gilbert were quite surprised by what they saw in front of them when they returned to the shop late at night. 6 stark white bone pillars were stuck in 6 different corners of the courtyard. Cold aura wafted from the center of the courtyard. There were clouds of foggy wraiths in the air, posturing and making faces as they danced through the air. A sinister feeling filled the surroundings. Several white foggy clouds were floating intangibly around the well in the center, forming leering and grimacing faces. A blood-red stone was placed within an indentation next to the well. Some of the wraiths floating through the air were circling around the stone with their bodies dyed red as a result. Han Shao was sitting down cross-legged in front of the stone with beams of black splendor emitting from the palms of his hands. His hands had turned into an inky black as hazy light circulated around his body, making his entire being appear quite evil. The doors to all the rooms around the courtyard had been opened and all the dusty rooms had been thoroughly cleaned. The light within them was cozy and inviting, with none of the cold air in the courtyard drifting into the rooms. "Oh my gosh, what did you do?" Emily exclaimed in surprise as she turned on the spot. Curiosity filled her eyes and she reached out a hand to touch one of the Shura pillars. "Don't move." Han Shao suddenly opened his eyes and called out softly to Emily. Emily's jade hand had been about to touch the pillar when she hastily yanked it back as if she'd been frightened. Phoebe and Gilbert were still a bit flabbergasted at the moment. They'd never have thought that this place would have been transformed so utterly within the span of a day. A strange presence suffused the courtyard, making them instinctively uncomfortable. They'd never seen this setup of straight things and had no idea what they were for. Their minds were full of questions at the moment. Smiling faintly, Han Shao stood up from his cross-legged position and dripped a drop of bright red blood into the stone. The breezy courtyard whipped up even stronger winds as the wraiths danced and howled with the addition of the blood. Bouts of cold air of death made everyone feel incredibly frightened. "Did you get everything I wanted you to purchase?" Han Shao smiled faintly. "Ask him, he was the one who collected the most important thing." Phoebe pointed at Gilbert with a reddened face. "Gracious master, why are you collecting the blood of virgins? You are too shameless and dirty." Gilbert griped and looked at Han Shao with a disdainful expression, yet he appeared quite excited. "Oh, shut up, did you get it?" Han Shao glared angrily at Gilbert. Hey, I did. There's nothing that can't be settled without gold coins. I spent only 50 gold coins and took a spin around the small alleyways of the valley to get what you needed." Gilbert took out a bottle the size of a palm as he spoke. Emily and Phoebe both snorted coldly when he took out that bottle, splitting off into 2 directions and heading for the rooms. "Why are you two snorting at me? I wasn't the one who wanted to do so, it was all master's orders." "Did you think I wanted to?" All those stupid women inside looked at me like they were looking at a huge pervert. "If I hadn't taken out the gold coins, I probably would have drowned from them spitting at me." Gilbert appeared quite aggrieved when he saw that both Emily and Phoebe were looking down on him and couldn't help but complain loudly. There were some crudely wealthy customers within the red light district who liked to be waited upon by virgins. In order to lure these customers, those in charge would spend a great deal of money to purchase virgin slaves. Han Shao had sent Gilbert there precisely because he knew this. Although Han Shao had a thick enough skin, he still couldn't set aside his face enough to purchase these things. After all, if someone with no idea of what was going on saw his actions, they would think his actions were dirty enough indeed. Alright, go about your business, don't bother me." Han Shao rather understood Gilbert's complaints but didn't bother comforting him. Han Shao had used the Demon Slayer edge to carve various complicated drawings on the 6 Shura pillars. He now hauled a bucket of spirit water from the place of extreme water and diluted the bottle of virgin blood within it. He used a spoon made from the wood of a peach tree to stir it, then picked up the bucket and flew upwards, landing on top of the first Shura pillar, and poured the liquid on top of the pillar. Emily and Phoebe exited their warm rooms when they saw Han Shao start his work. Their clear eyes were full of curiosity about Han Shao's actions. The reddish liquid flowed down the pictures that Han Shao had carved earlier. Amazingly, none of the liquid dripped to the ground. They filled the cracks within the pictures as if being tightly attracted by a surge of power. Han Sha-o threw the empty bucket away to the side after he poured the liquid over the 6 pillars. He then flew to the blood-red stone next to the well and sent black sparkles soaring up from his palm, forming a magical formation and branding it into the center of the blood-red stone. The 6 pillars suddenly glowed with a red light as the faces of all sorts of howling and wailing ghostly faces appeared in the pictures carved onto the Shura pillars. The 100 wraiths that had been flying around the courtyard sped towards these pictures as if sparrows returning to a nest. The originally intangible wraiths melded with the twisting shapes of the ghosts as they sank into the Shura pillars. The ghosts seemed to come alive as they started thrashing and dancing on the Shura pillars, revealing fanged and bloodthirsty mouths. Successive blood-curdling wails of desperation rang in the night sky, terrifying the nearby people. "This is bad." Han Sha-o was greatly startled. He hadn't thought that such frightening screams like the cries of ghosts and howls of wolves would sound after the formation was complete. He immediately formed another spell and threw it into the floating rock that had absorbed 5 drops of his blood essence. In that instant all the wraiths were sucked into the Shura pillars, and the pillars that had hundreds of ghosts dancing madly over them became lifeless as the wraiths would then seem to be frozen in the drawings of the ghosts. "Give me the rest of the materials." The formation should be completed first. "Even if that old monster Edwin pays a visit, I'll make sure he doesn't get off easily." Han Sha-o laughed madly as he spoke to Emily and Phoebe. Their 2 faces were full of shock at the moment. When they heard Han Sha-o's words, they handed over the items of gold that they'd purchased in a morass of confusion. When all the materials had been collected, Han Sha-o started flying rapidly around the courtyard amidst the 3 people's befuddled gazes. It was then that the 3 discovered that many large and small dishes that could perfectly hold all of the items in Han Sha-o's hands. Han Sha-o retreated from the courtyard when all was ready and summoned Gilbert to his side, where he was standing next to Phoebe and Emily. He gave a mental order and a beam of red light soared to the sky from within the courtyard. Wind howled in the courtyard for a moment as an extreme feeling of cold from the 100 dancing ghosts on the pillars suffused the other 3's hearts. The 3 understood that a simple courtyard had turned into a place of lethal danger after Han Sha-o's preparations. "Everything will be flawlessly perfect as soon as we erect a soundproof force field around the area." Han Sha-o turned to look at Emily with a mysterious smile. "Leave that to me." Emily understood his meaning and released a dark magic. Magic ripples suddenly appeared over the courtyard, coming down like a formless dome. "What happened? Did the curse of the evil god flare up?" Harris' call suddenly sounded from outside as hoofsteps echoed. Harris and others of the Cairo mercenary band appeared in front of the store on horseback, with Harris knocking on the door and calling out. As the eye of the formation, the floating rock also had 5 drops of Han Sha-o's blood essence on it. Therefore Han Sha-o could easily control the entire formation through the floating stone with a simple thought. When he heard Harris shout from the outside, Han Sha-o slightly changed the formation and made it revert back to normal. There were no other changes apart from the 6 Shura pillars. "Nothing much. Has Mr. Harris come by to tell us of some news?" Harris opened the door to let Harris in as he responded, easily beaming widely. Harris looked around with his sharp eyes after entering, sweeping them through every corner of the shop. He asked Han Sha-o with a bit of confusion, "Why have 6 strange pillars suddenly appeared?" "Oh, we plan on making this a long-term residence and created this 6 pillars for support because there's no place to hang anything out to dry." "What brings Mr. Harris by?" A bloody light flared just now and others in neighboring shops heard frightening wails come out from here. "They said that they were terrified and wanted us to come over to look at the situation. I was also worried that something had happened to you, so I came by to take a look." Laughing easily, Han Sha-o joked, "These people are quite cowardly. We were just practicing magic just now. We've several people here and wouldn't be afraid even if the curse kicked in." "Don't worry. The fellow collecting virgin blood is also your friend?" Harris nodded and was about to leave when he suddenly discovered Gilbert. He couldn't help but ask Han Sha-o, "You could say that." Han Sha-o felt a bit awkward as he turned back to glare at Gilbert. The latter was about ready to erupt in anger when Han Sha-o indicated for him to be quiet and then turned back to explain to Harris. "Why do you have this kind of friend? He's so disgusting." Harris looked at Gilbert with extreme disdain and seemed unwilling to stay longer as he hastily took his men and left. "The hell? It's all Master's orders. What the hell does it have to do with me?" Gilbert finally couldn't keep it in after Harris left and roared smoke coming out of his orifices. Chapter 208, The Purple Demon Eye. After Han Shuo's actions, the storefront had indeed turned into an incredibly dangerous place. Anyone who tried to enter without Han Shuo's guidance would be attacked by the formation. Those who lacked a sufficiently strong will would try to kill themselves as their minds grew confused. After thoroughly remaking the store, Phoebe, Emily and Gilbert all stayed there the night. Having seen the oddities of the yard, the three were on edge all night long, deathly afraid that something bad would happen to them as they slept. Fortunately, all was fine that night and Trunks returned at noon the next day. He had learned from the Cairo mercenary band as soon as he set foot into the Valley of Sunshine that Han Shuo had actually moved into the cursed storefront. When he swung by, he noticed the 6 starkly white pillars that had appeared in the courtyard. He was quite surprised and had no idea what was going on. I heard Harris say that something out of the ordinary had happened here yesterday. Did you guys run into something? Trunks asked after sitting down in the living room of the storefront. Smiling faintly, Han Shuo explained, we did run into a few things, but it was something I cooked up rather than the evil god's curse. There's no need to worry about anything. There's lots of rooms here. I left you one. Forget it. I think I'll be safer elsewhere. When I was in the Valley of Sunshine a few years ago, I saw many owners of this store suddenly die spontaneously. Although you've already diffused the danger, this place still makes me uneasy. Trunks noticeably had some psychological trauma from this location and waved his hands with a wry smile. Who is this kid? How dare he not trust the master? Exclamation mark. Gilbert was already ticked off from being labeled a pervert. When he heard Trunks hem and haw and refused to take up residence within, he couldn't help but speak up. And who are you? Trunks started and suddenly looked at Gilbert. Trunks had been acting a bit oddly since he'd come in on the back of his manticore. The manticore had been unafraid of anything beneath the heavens and on the earth, but was instinctively on his guard against Gilbert and tried to keep his distance from Gilbert. The manticore was a sentient being and could naturally sense the enormous presence of the super-ranked dark dragon. Even though Gilbert was currently in human form, the manticore still didn't want to draw close to Gilbert. It was the fear brought about from the difference in levels. As the owner of the manticore, Trunks had spent many years with the manticore and was well acquainted with its temper. When he saw the manticore's abnormal behavior, he started keeping an eye on Gilbert and couldn't help but question. Now, I am of the mighty dragon race, their future king, Gilbert. Gilbert had an arrogant look on his face as he proudly proclaimed this with the tones of a ringing bell. Just like your manticore, he's my magical pet, a perverted little black dragon. Han Shuo quelled Gilbert with a warning look and explained to Trunks. Trunks was incredibly shocked when he heard that Gilbert was a dark dragon. He couldn't help but sigh. You've got some skill, alright. I'd thought taming a manticore was something to be proud of. To think you could tame a dark dragon. It looks like you're stronger than me. It's nothing to do with me, I just so happened to get lucky. It's this dark dragon who shamelessly begged me. Han Shuo shrugged and said humbly. He then paused and changed his tone, asking Trunks, right, you didn't run into any trouble on your trip out of the valley this time, did you? How did everything go? Trunks' expression also became serious when he saw that Han Shuo was chatting about serious matters. He responded lowly, don't worry, I'm more familiar with the terrain of the valley than even Lorton or Florida. It won't be easy for most people to hurt me within the valley. I met some of my old friends and they were highly interested in forming a mercenary band. I've already sent someone to register the name of Soul Destroyer. We'll be able to have our own official name before long. Nodding, Han Shuo said, that's for the best. This will be our stronghold in the future. I'm sure that with Florida's ability he'll be able to find out where we are soon. We don't need to be a rush, we just need to wait for him to attack us. Since the formation had been set up, Han Shuo just wanted to test it out using Florida's men and see if it was as magical as he saw in Chu Kanglen's memories. Surprisingly, whether it was Florida or Edwin's men, no one came to bother them over the next 2 days. Han Shuo and his crew stayed here both days and only shopped a bit on the busy streets during the day. All the materials to refine the wood elite zombie had finally been collected. Phoebe used these couple of days to discuss some transactions with some of the merchants. She turned 2/3 of the jewels and crystals that Han Shuo had given her into 40,000 gold coins. He very trustfully gave all 40,000 gold coins to Trunks and allowed him free rein over this sum to form the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Han Shao trained silently in his room. He hadn't left the store at all over the past 2 days. After a low incantation broke the silence, the bright sun was suddenly covered by black clouds and the entire courtyard was plunged instantly into darkness. The sinister black clouds completely blocked off the sun's rays and a strong sense of death spread rapidly throughout the courtyard. The wraiths sealed within the pillars seemed to sense this marvelous presence and wanted to stir to action. This particularly dark magic spell could cause the presence of death to permeate the surroundings. Dark creatures that were located within it would have their attacks greatly strengthened and enemies caught in the range of the canopy of necromancy would be weakened thanks to the effects of this spell. At this point not only had Han Shao fully grasped all the spells that an adept mage should know, he could also use them skillfully. If he returned to the academy and made use of this strength, Han Shao was confident that he could easily advance to adept mage. When he thought of Fanny's promise with him and the right he'd have to go out with her once he advanced to adept mage, Han Shao felt quite excited by the thought of a steamy night with Fanny. Although he already had Emily and Phoebe, now his feelings for Fanny were something that the two would be unable to replace. Han Shao had never become lax about his magical cultivation, but the stage that demon infant was at meant that it needed the strength from souls to become stronger. Hard training alone wouldn't be enough to obtain improvement within the short term. Therefore Han Shao had also been waiting for an opportunity to obtain some stronger souls to nourish his demon infant. The sun was setting and Han Shao suddenly heard the little skeleton's call in the midst of his cultivation. An anxious, panicked feeling suddenly traveled from a plane far away as the little skeleton's urgent cry for help brought with it overtones of a hasty flight for life. After last time's experience, Han Shao immediately knew that the little skeleton must have met with some danger again. He didn't give it much thought as he immediately chanted the incantation, attempting to summon the little skeleton from the faraway plane with the connection they shared. When the incantation was complete, the air in front of him tore open as if a knife had sliced through it, and a little gleaming skeleton with 7 flapping bone spurs shot out of the crack like lightning. The figure of an enormous 6-meter-tall knight mounted on a flaming horse and wielding a 2-meter-long broadsword was suddenly illuminated in the crack behind the little skeleton. An enormous rotting air spread from the enormous figure as an overwhelming presence of death suffused the area, making one's heart palpitate. The dark creatures of the other dimension were bound by the laws of space. They could only display an enormous shadow. When the little skeleton was standing in front of Han Shao, the crack in the air went back to normal and the enormous presence vanished without a trace. The little skeleton had yet to recover as he clutched his bone dagger in his left hand and the eye patch in his right. After losing the eye patch, the purple demon eye from the statue of Datra sparkled with purple light as the little skeleton looked dumbly at Han Shao. An enormous strength suddenly exploded out of the little skeleton's purple demon eye. This power suddenly surged out with the purple demon eye as the center. It entered the little skeleton and Han Shao's body, attempting to take over their bodies. Just like in the forest troll's sacred place, the power from the purple demon eye was full of a violence that wanted to ravage everything. This power would always awaken after the eye patch was removed, like Dadara had truly left a bit of his consciousness behind in the eye. Put the eye patch on, hurry! Han Shao roared out violently as his body trembled in the throes of pain as several sharp knives seemed to stab his brain. The little skeleton was likewise rolling on the ground in pain. After receiving Han Shao's order, his hand bone shook as he slowly lifted the eye patch. Miraculously, the enormous power that had invaded the two vanished without a trace when the eye patch was placed back on. However, just as Han Shao was breathing a sigh of relief and was looking at the little skeleton, he saw purple light shoot out of the little skeleton's left eye as the eye patch that had been covering it ignited, going up in flames. Chapter 209, The Purifying Strength of Soul. When the eye patch that sealed the purple demon eye had burned to ashes, the eye embedded within the little skeleton's eye socket once again discharged an eye-piercing purple light. In that instant, that soul-wrenching pain once again invaded Han Shao and the little skeleton's body. The bone-deep pain made both Han Shao and the little skeleton tremble all over. Han Shao couldn't help but let a growl under his breath, and the little skeleton's star-white jawbone also clattered together as the two words were invaded by a mysterious power. Suddenly the demon infant residing in his abdomen surprisingly generated an enormous suction power. Han Sha-O had the sudden impression that the demon infant had turned into a black hole in that instant. His entire body seemed to turn into a great spider web with the demon infant at the center, and all his meridians had turned into the durable fibers of the spider web. Thanks to the absorption force, the force that had invaded Han Sha-O's body streamed towards the demon infant along the meridians of the spider web like streams returning to the ocean. The heart-wrenching pain decreased by quite a bit when his body morphed into this state. The invading power in Han Sha-O's body was sent to the demon infant. Just like how Johnny's soul had once been digested and absorbed, this power was being turned into nutrients to aid a crazy rate of development for the demon infant. As the pain in his body slowly came under control, Han Sha-O saw that the little skeleton was still rolling continuously on the ground. He struggled to make it to the little skeleton's side and aimed the palm of his left hand at the skeleton's left eye socket, releasing the mnemonic art of assimilation. Magical light suddenly sparkled from his left hand as beams of faint purple light flowed into his body through Han Sha-O's arm. They were sent via the meridians to the demon infant just like the surge of power in his body had been treated. This was when Han Sha-O was certain that the power from the purple demon eye was one of the soul. Judging from the close relation between the forest trolls and their protector Datara, this might very well be the vestiges of soul power left by the demon Data on this plane. Compared to Johnny's soul, the soul from the purple demon eye was even stronger. The violent rampaging presence held within was met with no resistance from the demon infant. Instead, the demon infant circulated the power from that soul madly, slowly purifying it. Looking in on the demon infant, Han Sha-O could see that the demon infant now looked like a sun burning with black spell fire, sending out piercing magic light in all directions. At the moment, Han Sha-O's body was also glowing with light as beams of a violent, chaotic and evil magical aura wreathed his body. From the distance it looked like Han Sha-O had suddenly gained countless black arms that were dancing wildly around him. After who knew how long, Han Sha-O suddenly relaxed as a crisp cracking sound rang out. Something seemed to have broken in the purple demon eye as it suddenly lost its light. A cloud of purple smoke leaked out from the little skeleton's left eye as the demon infant kept furiously circulating the power from the soul. The power that he'd gained from the purple demon eye was heads and shoulders above the amount that they'd obtained from Johnny a few days ago. When Han Sha-O felt that all the power had been absorbed into the demon infant, he gave the little skeleton an order to protect him. After that, Han Sha-O sat down cross-legged to enter a meditative state to digest everything. The power within the purple demon eye had been completely absorbed by the demon infant. The little skeleton sat dumbly on the floor for a while when he was released from his agony. After the mysterious power had vanished, the purple demon eye embedded within the little skeleton's left eye socket rolled around adroitly, giving the little skeleton a trace of life. What's going on? Emily and Gilbert detected that black magical aura had exploded out of Han Sha-O's room, and they couldn't help but come forth to investigate. The little skeleton had been sitting on the floor when he heard the knocks from outside. He straightened his calf bones and stood up, walking to open the door as his eye rolled a bit. When Emily and Gilbert saw that a short white skeleton had appeared in front of them when the door was open, and that there was a purple eyeball in his left eye socket whirring busily, both of them hastily took a few steps back in their fright. Reaching out to point his left finger at Han Sha-O, the little skeleton's eye rolled in a circle as his hand reached for his mouth and made a shushing gesture. His meaning for Emily and Gilbert was that he needs quiet, don't disturb him. Emily and Gilbert stared dumbly back at this little skeleton that was telling them to be quiet. They instinctively felt that the scene in front of them was too much of a challenge for their minds. A dark creature had made such a human gesture in front of them, and there was even an lifelike eyeball rolling around in his left eye socket. All of this seemed unimaginably fantastic. It was a good thing that it wasn't Emily's first day knowing Han Sha-O. When she'd fought Han Sha-O, she'd come up short against this little skeleton. Thus, when she looked carefully at the little skeleton and noticed the 7 bone spurs on his back, she immediately understood that while the bone spurs' color had changed, this little skeleton was still the same marvelous skeleton that had been immune to most dark magic and had relentlessly chased her. I think your master must be having some sort of marvelous advancement this time again. We won't disturb him then. Taking a deep breath, Emily shook her head at Gilbert and indicated for him to leave with her. After the Earth Elite zombies' sudden rage in the cemetery, Secretary of Death Gilbert understood that his master's dark creatures were different than the ones that he knew. If there was a zombie could form a large crack in the ground to attack him just for one sentence, then it wasn't too difficult to understand a small skeleton that made such human gestures. I think it'll be very interesting to follow such a master. Gilbert looked at the little skeleton curiously and waved his hand goodbye, turning to speak to Emily after closing the door. I think so too, but you must continuously improve yourself or you might find one day that you can't even defeat one of your master's dark creatures. Emily had learned from Han Shao that the dark creatures he refined had the unlimited potential to evolve by themselves. She'd been a bit skeptical at first but was a firm believer now that she'd seen the little skeleton's performance. Han Shao had been wholly unaware of Emily and Gilbert's visit. The enormous power from the purple eye was making him focus his concentration to the utmost, and he was impervious to all distractions from the outside world. Some magical cultivators needed to find an exceedingly quiet area to mediate behind closed doors when training some sort of secret art or refining some treasure. They would also set up multiple layers of heavy defenses in order to prevent disturbances. So much caution was taken because this was when a cultivator was most defenseless. Not a single bit of distraction could happen during this process, or one would run the risk of a cultivation deviation or waste of previous effort. 2 days and nights passed. Han Shao stayed within his room during this time, and Phoebe, Emily and Trunks all busied themselves with setting up the mercenary band or continuing to talk business into selling more of Han Shao's jewels. On that night the crew was staying within the store and discussing how best to use the gold as well as the most efficient way to handle the mercenary band's affairs when a member of the Cairo mercenary band suddenly knocked to say that a group of people were on their way over. The mercenary left immediately after delivering this message, saying that they needed to report this to the chief or vice chief of the Cairo mercenary band. He warned them to be careful and informed them that their men would arrive in half an hour. It looks like the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries are on their way over. Brian can't be disturbed at the moment, and we don't know when he'll wake up either. We're in a bit of trouble now, Emily said with a small frown when the mercenary left. We'll give whoever dares come a thorough beating if they dare trespass. Gilbert was obviously not thinking much of this matter as he blustered offhandedly. They're not that easy to take care of. Florida's experts are as numerous as the clouds, and the Church of Light has sent some reinforcements as well. You may not be able to win even if you turn back into a dragon, Trunks also said with a deep frown. Brian can't be disturbed right now. The dark creature is protecting him right now, so he probably can't leave. We must protect him if he's here. As long as we can stall things for a bit so that the Cairo mercenaries come, then all should be fine. Phoebe thought silently for a bit and then responded. Dull hoofbeats sounded in the quiet night air. One could judge from the sound that the hooves of these battle steeds had been wrapped by cotton cloth or something soft. Be careful, let's protect Brian's room first, Emily called out softly and said to the others. Chapter 210, a whirling bone dagger. The enemies had come swifter than they had thought. No sooner had hoofbeats sounded in the distance did strange noises start coming from the roof. Go leave the rooms, go to the courtyard. Trunks maintained a calm expression as he hefted a long sword and walked towards the courtyard with Amanda Comer. There was a wide courtyard in the middle of the storefront with various large and small rooms around its perimeter. If the enemy attacked and pierced through the walls and then used fire magic to set the rooms on fire, it would force Trunks and the others to be on the defensive. In addition, Han Shao had once told them after he'd painstakingly made his preparations that enormous danger lurked within the 6 pillars. But if they stood in certain positions next to the pillars, they wouldn't be affected by the formation. The formation wasn't active now, but once the 6 pillars were violently attacked, the formation would have a natural reaction even without Han Shao's orders. We're not familiar with the things inside the courtyard, so let's not make a thoughtless move unless we have to. If we really can't defend ourselves, we'll hit the pillars and then quickly hide into the 6 safe areas and gamble, Emily said to the other 3 while she took out her staff and walked into the courtyard. It'd been 2 days since Han Shao had cast the canopy of necromancy, so there wasn't much of an effect left from it now. The starry sparkles were like diamonds embedded in the night sky, and the light from the myriad actual stars in the sky added a few traces of scattered light in the night. The light was just enough for those in the courtyard to roughly make out their surroundings. A sound suddenly howled through the air as a little bone dagger with a coldly flashing handle started traveling over the roof like a lost soul. The howling from the little bone dagger ripped through the quiet of the night sky. Its gleam was particularly eye-catching as it brought a cold, harsh presence of death. It flew over the tops of the roofs in a marvelous trail with no discernible pattern to it. Several soft sounds echoed from the dark corners that the little bone knife flew past. Suddenly agonized screams rang out from those hard-to-view corners. 3 dark shadows then fell off from the roof into the courtyard in an exceedingly bedraggled manner. Trunks and the others immediately knew what had happened when they saw this. When they saw 3 people lying on the ground not far from them bleeding profusely, they didn't even think before rushing up to finish them off. The 3 on the ground had been struggling to their feet when they were laid back down in eternal slumber beneath Trunks and Phoebe's 2 flashing swords. The group looked in surprise toward Hansha'o's room when the 3 were dead. They saw a corner lifted from the window blinds and the whirling purple eye in the little skeleton's left socket sparkling with a sinister purple light. There seemed to be a purple ball of ghostly flame dancing around behind the window. His sparkling clean hand bone waved continuously. The weaving bone dagger seemed to be manipulated by his hands as it danced around with no pattern whatsoever. Frightening little skeleton. Trunks looked and couldn't help but shake his head. "Look over there," Gilbert suddenly shouted out. The other 3 looked over accordingly and saw that 3 clouds of gray mist were floating out of the 3 would-be ambushers' heads. The gray clouds seemed to be attracted by some sort of power as soon as they left their bodies and were soon absorbed by the 2 closest pillars. If I saw correctly, those 3 gray clouds were the souls of the 3 who just died. Ordinarily speaking, people's souls return to the earth after they've died, and most people won't be able to see them without the effects of magic. As a dark archmage, Emily's knowledge in this area was a bit more broad than others, and she explained to the rest with a furrowed brow. "Then why can't we see it, and why did the 3 pillars absorb the gray clouds?" Phoebe asked in bafflement. Shaking her head with a wry smile, Emily turned to look at Hansha'o's room. "How would I know the reason behind all this? If you want to understand everything, wait for him to wake up first. This courtyard is full of oddities and it's all his doing. I don't think I'd understand if he explained it either." Phoebe was just as hard-pressed to understand Hansha'o's mysteriousness as Emily was. She shook her head ruefully after Emily's words. The little bone dagger was still twirling without rest as the 4 were chatting. The 3 who'd wanted to ambush them hadn't even clearly taken in their surroundings before they were counter-ambushed and died ignobly. This had been so unjust. However, those 3 were just a scouting party. Although they had died, it didn't affect the enemies in the rear. When the dull hoofbeats suddenly quieted, Trunks and the others knew that the true battle was about to begin. The little bone dagger's howl suddenly grew more fierce. When the 4 looked over, the little bone dagger had already left the vicinity of the roof and was flying towards the sky in the distance. 2 faint figures slowly became clear in the direction that the bone dagger was flying in. They seemed to be 2 masses of floating clouds in the starry night sky being sent on their way by the wind. "It's 2 archmages, we need to be careful." Emily started and issued a grave reminder. A fiercely burning flame suddenly sprang up in front of the little bone dagger as soon as Emily had spoken. The dagger shone with even more of a cold light beneath the light of the fire, and it sent an eye-piercing ray in all directions. Several crossbow bolts suddenly came shooting from the front. 5 had been shot out, but only 1 accurately connected with the little bone dagger. The whirling dagger was knocked off its path and dropped down, landing with a clink on the streets not too far away. At that moment, the sound of the doors being broken down echoed as a fast patter of footsteps quickly approached. Roughly a dozen armored people immediately filled the courtyard, wielding all sorts of swords, spears, axes, and bows. 2 archmages floated down to the roofs. Now that the dagger was no longer a threat, they cast a cold eye down on the proceedings. "Trunks, you're here all right." The cold voice of the fire archmage who saved Florida at the gates to the Valley of Sunshine last time sounded one of the 2 standing on one of the rooftops. "Andy, you traitor, how dare you come see me? The old chief treated you well, and that staff in your hands was something that the old chief spent a great deal of money to get someone to refine for you. To think that you'd still be with that swine Florida after the old chief died." Trunks pointed the longsword in his hand at Andy and hectored coldly. "The old chief's death was an accident. He died at the hands of robbers in the surrounding mountain ranges and had nothing to do with Florida. You envied Florida sitting in the seat of the chief of the Rainbow Sickles, that's why you're framing him. Andy looked disdainfully at Trunks and mocked him. I think that with your intelligence you will be able to see what's really going on here. I've come back this time to make sure all you traitors pay the price. Andy first laughed jeeringly and then looked at Trunks with a gaze full of pity. Today is when you'll die. You won't have the chance to in the future. Stop wasting time with him. Lorden's men may show up at any time. We need to kill them immediately. The other archmage who'd come with him said expressionlessly. There was the emblem of lightning on this person's magic robes. It looked like he was a thunder archmage. He seemed about 30 years old and had gray-brown locks. He was as thin as a bamboo pole as he paced back and forth on the roof. I know, Andy said impatiently. He didn't seem to have cordial relations with this thunder mage. He then cast a slightly odd look downwards and said with an equally odd tone, "Do it!" Exclamation mark. The enemies in the courtyard were comprised of swordsmen, knights and archers. The weakest amongst them were sergeant knights or journeyman swordsmen. There was also one completely covered in a green robe wearing a pointy hat. His features couldn't be made out in the darkness, but there was an enormous presence from him. Andy had been looking and not really looking at this person when he spoke earlier. His tone didn't sound like he was giving an order but more like he was asking his elder's opinion. When Andy's question concluded, this person suddenly moved as an enormous harsh silver sword aura suddenly emanated from his body. As he moved and the harsh sword aura cut through the air, the pointy hat on his head flew backwards, revealing a face that Emily and Phoebe were very familiar with. "Gabriel, it's you!" Emily couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Gabriel was Clark's master and possessed the extraordinary strength of a great sword master. He was Bob Asher's right-hand man but had popped up here instead.